Hello.
Hey, Greg. Last one.
Yeah.
Are we coming back in spring, in Feb? I think so.
By popular demand.
Only by popular demand.
Right.
So we are finishing with, finishing strong with the MTL Plus Collective, which is Amin Hussain and Natasha Dillon, who are going to join us. And Jasbir Poor was supposed to be with us, but we had some scheduling issues. So, but she promises to do some stuff with us for the season 2. Greg, what are we? Should we start with a recap? I thought last week's conversation was actually super intense. Maybe that's because we are in the university and in like thinking about syllabi and diversity and all that stuff. But maybe a recap and then we move on.
Let's do it.
And the university has caused, irreparable damage to the South Side of Chicago and its majority Black residents.
Thinking about institutional multiculturalism or diversity initiatives as they exist, on the one hand, as being produced by actual radical social movements, right, in the 60s and 70s, particularly student movements. And on the other hand, the institutions themselves were created precisely to manage those movements.
We're uplifting and trying to work with student and community organizations who have long been calling for the disclosure of all funding that is allocated to the University of Chicago Police Department, because we do not have access to that information. And we want to work towards the eventual disbanding of the University of Chicago Police Department. The University of Chicago Police Department exercises an enormous amount of power and has an incredibly large area in which they operate that extends way past the boundaries of the university.
All the things that we are able to like theoretically and politically demolish then come back to haunt us when we have to make a syllabus. And we're like, ugh, do I teach this like kind of writer or this kind, or like how do we, how to manage that? And I don't have the answer to that yet, but I think the beginning of an answer is like, the answer is not going to be the better syllabus, right? The answer is going to be, again, kind of fundamental transformations in the way we do intellectual work.
Whoa,
Yes. Right.
Strong words. What did you get out of that? I think I learned a lot of new stuff.
Yeah, so both Tony and Sophia, I think, made clear as how, and I think maybe what made for an intense conversation is just, our educational institutions aren't separate from other institutions, the police, the state. We know this and we teach this, but it's also, I think it was interesting to see how much their actions and activism has to take all of that into account, right? You can't, you can change the syllabus, but can you change the syllabus without discussing, the involvement in, university police departments, etc. So, I thought that was good and intense. Definitely.
Yeah, I think the stuff about the cops was very strong. Also, I didn't know that the campus cops, the history of having cops on campus was to manage like campus protests and all this kind of burgeoning diversity and so on. So I think that was a lot of learning there. When I first came to the US, I went to Bard College, which is like an idyllic rural campus. It was like 1,000 kids at that time on 800 acres, and everyone's artistic and hippie. But literally within 2 months of arriving there was a Black student who was beaten by the police, like right in front of my dorm. And there, it was not about the campus cops infiltrating into the city, but it was like the regular cops having their lay of the campus in a way, So it's just like, it's really intertwined and it's awful. So it's all different, I think, for different types of universities. But then I ended up watching Aaron Sorkin's Chicago 7, and I was like, who is going to play Sophia? Which British actor will play Sophia when they make the movie of the current University of Chicago stuff? Oh God, there they are. Look at the eyeliner on him. I forced you to watch it. What did you think?
Oh, Bhakti, I think that I will never forgive you. This is what I think. I had vowed I made the promise to myself not to watch it, and here I was watching it, and it was.
Why are you so prejudiced? Why wouldn't you give it a fair trial?
I'm not a fan of Sorkin. To give it a trial, very good. I'm not a fan of Sorkin. I did not expect much of his treatment of this particular piece of history, and I was not disappointed in my disappointment. Let's put it.
Yeah, there were some revolutionary acts. You know, as part of our fake revolution segment, we have to point out the fake revolutionary acts, puncturing the tires of the cop car. Brave protest. The other thing was the soliloquy on the use of possessive pronouns by Borat. Oh, I'm sorry, he was playing Abby Hoffman. And you know, these were these gotcha moments. But of course, the to be serious, the treatment of the Black Panthers, the objectification, and like using them as props, just to kind of claim that this one bad judge made everything go wrong was super problematic to me, because once you have the spectacle of the Bobby Seale being bound and gagged in the courtroom, we never hear about them again. It's over.
Well,
That's all. We're just building up to that.
They did take him out of the court, right? But yeah, no, I mean, it's. I mean, he has. I mean, I feel like he has the same line throughout the show, right? I mean, he repeats constantly. I have a lawyer, and then there's violins, and he sits down and he starts all over again. And yeah, I mean, if you don't know anything about the Panthers, you will not find out anything about the Panthers in that season, except that they wear berets or take them off.
Yeah.
And Hampton. I mean, yeah, it's just, I don't know. I mean, it's unclear to me. No, maybe it's too clear to me what the point was. And you mentioned this, right? Just how oddly, pro-American it ends up being. And it's just, I don't know, like the triumph in the end when it's just like you have a slow clap with violence. What? I mean, I don't know. It's just too much for me, and I knew it was going to be, and I do not forgive you.
Yeah, of course. I had a very important Twitter thread, which you didn't retweet, but one of the things I was saying was that the Sorkin universe is always about how beautiful the American system and institutions are, but a couple of bad people can really corrupt it, and then you kind of you get that fetish even in here. But you were going to tell me about Lovecraft Country, which you were bitching about as well. I haven't watched it because I'm super terrified of that type of the violence that I've heard. But generally, people have been ecstatic about it. I
feel like we're reaching the second wave here, and full disclosure, I will be participating in it. In an article to come out on Public Books. That's my own horn. I was. There's almost too much to say about this. I think this is it's definitely riding a wave of Black representation in mainstream media and TV shows and whatnot. I don't think it does it well. I was not a big fan of the book to begin with. I feel it's a decent adaptation of the book, but then the book was problematic. It also managed to add problems that were not in the book, and that are really, really problematic. I think it was an article in the New York Times saying that they use a history of Black pain as sort of props and for spectacle. Very obvious, and you could, potentially say this about any TV show, right? Except, of course, there's a way to do this, and I don't think the way they do it is the right way to put it.
It's gratuitous, you think?
Yeah, and I mean, it might seem like an obvious thing to say about a horror show. I mean, obviously, as a genre, it sort of thrives on freaking people out, right? I mean, you using gore. I mean, all things that I guess people could always have issues with. That's not the issue I have with it. I expect that much from a horror show, but I don't expect to see the Tulsa massacre treated the way it was, which I thought was not just gratuitous, but sort of sensationalistic in a bad way. And I feel they did something very similar with Emmett Till, of all people. And it was anyway, it's not as direct, but I think it's even more problematic what they end up doing. It's sort of gleeful in a way that I don't understand.
Okay. Well, we'll wait for your review. I'm excited to read it. And I think it's Halloween, a cultural custom that I never managed to adapt. So I know you're a fan. I feel nothing. I have children, so I feel sad that they're in Kenya and they always miss the candy and all that nonsense. But I don't get it. Anyway, let's move on. I see that Amin and Natasha are now waiting. So Varia is in the back end, and Varia, maybe we can just quickly have bios.
Running out the door of the old gas station. He makes it to the pump and say, don't ask no question. Quick, get into the car, we're heading for redemption. I want you to see all night the springtime comes.
Hey, welcome.
Wow.
Did not see that coming.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, you guys make gorgeous protest art, beautiful banners, beautiful everything. Before we start, I'm just going to say like 2 quick lines. It's very hard to define you both, but I'm going to just say a couple of things. So the MTL Collective, I think sometimes it's MTL Plus Collective. At least, so we have Amin Hussain and Natasha Dillon, and they are a collaboration that joins research, aesthetics, organizing, and action in its practice. They are facilitators of the incredible Decolonize This Place movement based in New York City that organizes around indigenous rights, Black lives, Palestine, degentrification, patriarchy, dismantling patriarchy, and economic inequality. So their actions often take place at museums and cultural institutions and focus on questions of decolonization. That's what I found. So welcome. Thanks for coming. I know how busy you both are, so I'm glad we could make the time.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. Greg.
Oh, it's my turn. All right, so we'll start with an easy, maybe not so easy question. MTL Collective. When I first started reading about you, I kept wondering, so what do those letters stand for? I know that's a question you get asked all the time, but I very much like the answer. So what does MTL stand for?
MTL doesn't stand for anything. It basically, the idea is that it constantly keeps moving and it creates space as we move through this time and space and learn how to ask better questions and learn from our failures. We keep learning and failing and then trying again. And that's why, it's supposed to create space. It doesn't have a fixed meaning. And then in terms of, I wanted to point out, MTL Plus is a bigger group. Me and Amin are MTL. And then MTL Plus is like, we're 8 in total, and all of us together facilitate Decolonize This Place. And then me and Amin, are MTL, and we are also making a film and, also part of many other projects. Yeah.
Yeah, it made me think there's a hardcore punk band from the 80s called MDC. They stand like, this the name changes at every album.
Part of what went into also just thinking about the name, naming is a thing, right? And naming becomes a noun, and a noun doesn't involve verb, and it doesn't involve action. We're really interested in action and movements, but I also think the acronyms, things that become well known, become acronyms. And you saw that in liberation struggles, PLO, PFLP.
Mm-hmm.
In India would be the same, all these different groups and movements.
There's like 100 Kranti groups in India. And then by the end of it, you're like, see, there's all these letters. So
yeah, so in a way what we were doing is thinking, how can you how can 3 letters hold space, refer to something in the past, but then it constantly be defined or have meaning? And also the person that thinks about it then brings their own personality or background or lived experience into thinking what it could mean, like the punk rock band. So
I'm going to start
That's
this
cool.
up now as an inspiration.
Wow. Well, my attraction to inviting you and have been following your work for a while is, of course, to do with the use of the term decolonization or decolonize as a verb, and so on. As I think I told you, I'm working on a book series called Decolonize That, and we are looking at different sites that some are extremely serious. They're all very serious, but some are sort of very serious, like environmentalism and so on. And then some are more lifestyle related, like self-care. And then Greg is writing one on hipsters, which has gone from being kind of bit of a LOL to like, quite intense about white supremacy and stuff like that. It's very serious. So I just wanted to know how you use the term decolonization, especially in the light of now the term getting a bit hollowed out, especially with universities using them the way they are. In France, there's been like documentaries, it's almost getting, it's in the air, so how does one work through that?
Yeah. I mean, I could get us started. So both me and Amin come from like, the third world kind of decolonial context. And that was our kind of background, like very much like Fanon, right? And so coming from like the Palestinian freedom movement or like the Indian national freedom movement and the history of that. And so I think that was the opening point for us in terms of decolonization. And then along the years organizing in New York City, one of the things, and especially focused on Palestine and, a lot of work that we did with Gulf labor, specifically the Guggenheim Museum and things like that. The things that we started thinking about is like, what does decolonization also, like, how do we also relate to decolonization here when we're on stolen land? We are also settlers, even though we are immigrants. And so what does solidarity look like, in terms of both indigenous sovereignty, but also Black liberation, Palestine, and how does imperialism then factor in? And I think for us, that's been a really good journey because quite often, the way decolonization is looked at over here is in the North American kind of like settler colonization context, and in the movement space that I'm talking about. And there's a lot of focus on Black liberation and on indigenous sovereignty, but there is an edge of imperialism, anti-imperialist kind of a framework that's missing in these movements. And I think that's been our approach, is to think about decolonization much more globally from New York and also from places like Palestine or Punjab, and coming through with like a different context of what decolonization could mean.
Yeah, and just to add and offer a different parallel, I mean, I think that we think of movement-generated theory and movement-generated practice. So for us, arriving to decolonization as an analytical framework to act came from the streets. It came from the limitations of issue silos and social justice causes that don't recognize the specific context, where you can be both an oppressor and oppressed in a myriad of ways. So how can you build a type of solidarity, or as Fred Moten would call a coalition, that is about getting free? The second point is that it's worth noting, especially since we have people in Nairobi and in other places around the world, and where we come from and the histories that we carry with us, decolonization isn't a word that exists in Arabic, right? The closest thing to decolonization is taharrur, which is liberation or to get free. And that's really the heart of what we're trying to get at. It's building on in our context, it would be building on our histories, but also the Black radical tradition and indigenous struggle in this country, to think about what will it take for us to get free collectively, right? And that's where the idea of decolonial solidarities that recognize that you can be on stolen land, be forced here, be dispossessed in a different way, but all of us are dispossessed and we're pitted against each other. So then how can we do two things? Fight back, but also recognize the differential amongst us in the world that we want to build, in the relationships we want to create, in the institutions we want to uphold. It doesn't happen like in the 60s or 70s. That was a failed project of decolonization, if you use the English language. What you had over there was like freedom or self-determination becoming synonymous with the nation state and whatever. And it's like what we're standing for is fuck that. There's a different way of doing this. And that's where we also learn from the Zapatistas.
And just one thing
Or
to
Rojava.
and one thing to add, I mean, the way I think we think about decolonization is that it doesn't have a blueprint. It's a process, and you start from, you know, ground up where you are. So even like, you know, all these different cultural institutions, or even in the city, we don't have the same demands for each institution. It's very context specific to the institution and what its colonial history has been. And I think that's what we're seeing, as you were mentioning, Bhakti, like in terms of, you know, you're seeing decolonial term come about in the academia, or like the decolonial term, somebody coined it, and you're just like, you know, like this is not about another theoretical gesture, you know, this has been a lifelong struggle. And I mean, I'm not really that concerned, because I think, like, you know, waves in fashion come and go, but like the work will keep going on. And this is, you know, and I think, like, for us, we always have to think about it in terms of unsettling power. As long as we're, you know, unsettling things and making people uncomfortable where we need to, you know, I think that's really important.
Yeah,
I think
you know,
because institutions were mentioned. Like, why do I mean? The question presents itself as, why do we focus on museums? And we've been asked this question a lot. It's not because we want to decolonize the museum. Fuck the museum. It's there's a war being waged in the imagination, in reality, in our lives, against the people we love and we care about, right? And the museums aren't neutral. In fact, they're pillars of the type of carceral nature of what we're experiencing. And this is the thing that you learn from struggles to get free. At the end of the day, your oppressor isn't trying to defeat you. They're trying to convince you that you cannot win, and you are defeated. That's where you nip the thing from the bud. And places like museums that make us focus on representation and also be in a rat race, artists against each other, right? As if we're not giving shit and putting into a capitalist system where people hide their money and their taxes. So we're engaged in that. So then the question again is, for museums, not only do you have stolen shit, not only do you hire white people to do all the other work, not only is it a non-democratized space and you're art washing people's bad money, but you're actually also an agent of gentrification. And you're also all these other things, and you're making it more difficult for us to have a conversation. So what does a museum look like when it's sanctuary for real? What does a museum look like when people look at it and say, hey, this is for us, not against us, right? Not something we shouldn't belong to or be a part of. That's what we're trying to unsettle and open up.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Yeah, you know, and I want to come back to the why museums thing, but just generally in terms of the notion of symbols and metaphors and so on. But before that, I was wondering, you know, one of the things you focus on is gentrification. And I feel like in terms of sort of just politics of location or wherever we might be, we're always somehow in the grip of that, but there's somehow an inability to connect it with dispossession or displacement or suffering, you know.
Okay.
I lost.
Yeah, you're breaking back to you. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry. So I said, yeah, I just wanted to know how one thinks about. Okay, good. Sorry. To generally open up a question about gentrification, how we make the connection in dispossession, you know, suffering, and so on. Like, there's Palestine, and then there's New York, and you know, the kind of, and why is it so hard to people?
Okay. I'm gonna.
I think I understand the question you were asking. So I mean, I think
she's not there. Literally.
Oh,
she can
she's
hear you.
yeah,
Okay.
she's there. So
no,
I mean,
I'm here.
give the exact. I mean, this also answers the questions of like why museums. So Brooklyn Museum is an excellent example for that question. You know, the first time we did an action at the Brooklyn Museum, in fact, the name Decolonize This Place comes from that action. There was a show at the Brooklyn Museum called This Place, you know, that was organized by basically a lot of, you know, the funders were a lot of Israeli banks. It was supposed to be this neutral look on like Palestine, Israel. It was 7 photographers, you know, the best you can think of, Stephen Shore, Jeff Wall, kind of looking at a neutral way at, you know, what is Israel/Palestine. But what it was really was an art washing of a whole occupation, right? And that was happening right here in Brooklyn. And so for us, it was like, you know, like what can we do while we are here to show solidarity with the Palestinian struggle? But then how does that struggle connect to where Brooklyn Museum is at? And so already what was going on at the Brooklyn Museum was that David Berliner, he's like the president of the Brooklyn Museum. He's a real estate tycoon of the neighborhood and has been, you know, displacing people in terms of gentrification. And then apart from that, as I mentioned, they also have remains and, you know, artifacts, both African and indigenous, that we don't even know about. But apart from that, also being on stolen land. And the museum in itself, the way where it is located, there was like, you know, a history of Mohawk iron workers in that location. So what we did with our museum action was really think about who's in the room, who's not in the room, and who needs to be in the room in terms of our organizing. And that's really important, right? It wasn't about like, let's speak on behalf of anybody or like, you know, represents these struggles. That's the point around issue silos that Amin was talking about. We organized to think about how can we actually build this decolonial solidarity, like kind of coalition together, even though coalition is a contested term, you know, like basically relations. How do we build these relations where, you know, gentrification is looked at in terms of long-term displacement? So gentrification organizers connected with, you know, indigenous sovereignty or Palestinian kind of organizing. And I think that's what makes us stronger and, you know, not defeatable. And I think that was some of the work that we started doing with the Brooklyn Museum, was bringing groups together. And then we asked for a decolonizing commission. And that's still, you know, as one demand that has all of these things in it. Don't, you know, BDS, which is, you know, boycott, divestment, sanctions for Palestine. Follow BDS, no gentrification. You know, you have looted shit. You're on stolen land. You have police. You collaborate with the police on every Saturday. It's a carceral museum. So all of them are not separate issues. They come together under one process of the Decolonization Commission.
Yeah, and just so the thing around gentrification, and I want to pick up on a couple of things around suffering and analysis. I think that one of the things around moving in the world in such a way in which you blend something beyond praxis is what we're going for, right? And when I say we, I mean we're part of a larger community of people that are thinking this way, right? And some of them are probably on the call, like Connor and so forth. We're all been thinking and having these conversations, but essentially, most of us are gentrifiers here. Now, this is not an identity that we hold. This is a positionality that we need to account for and be responsible for, and it comes with certain agency, right? So it's not that, hey, sorry, can I please let everyone know I'm a gentrifier, which is a form of displacement and dispossession and a movement of wealth upward. So it's a class-based thing. It's to say, okay, that's one thing I've been forced into. What debts do I owe now? Right? As I try to get free, as I try to build. So us being in Brooklyn, we cannot not be against gentrification. It doesn't disqualify us that we're gentrifiers. You know what I mean? And that's why a broader analysis is important. Right. It means what kind of relationships do we build? But the other thing is like, it's not about the suffering, it's about the desire. So most of the organizing that you tend to see comes from trauma and from suffering and from some whatever, and that's legit. There's hundreds and thousands of years of ideology and harm. But one of the generative ways that we have to fight for and work hard towards is how can we dream, how can we desire, and then how can we act, not be in la la land on another cloud, right? But we have to move from a place of desire. We have to desire to get free. We have to desire to love. We have to desire to care.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Anything wrong with that either, right? I mean, I mean, maybe the term itself, but I mean, the goals that you set for yourselves that insofar as they're hopeful, like you sort of shoot for something that's not already there, right? Like, I mean, it's easy to dismiss as such, but then again, if it were there, then there wouldn't be a conversation to begin with, right? So, yeah, I mean, this evokes to me. I can mention that for the French context, because you mentioned trying to work with those existing institutions, and you mentioned the Brooklyn Museum, and I know in other interviews I've heard of you, you pointed out that they have regularly fairly political shows, right? Usually retrospectives and looking at maybe earlier and current political art, but I feel there's something about focusing that sort of ties to our conversation earlier about this spate of TV shows about past activism, right? That's sort of like everybody can feel good about Abby Hoffman now, or even the Black Hole. It's easy. It doesn't cost anything. You can tell your friends that you love them, right? It makes no difference. And I don't want to say that art exhibitions are exactly the same, but I feel there's a dimension of this, especially to the extent that it looks like you're doing something, right? I mean, it's not easy to put an exhibition together, but it's easy to pretend that it does something it's not doing. And along those lines, just to move this geographically a little bit, in France, there's been a conversation for the past few years about the enormous collections of art from Africa that was pilfered there during the colonial era, and that now sits in museums all over France, mostly in Paris. And the president made a speech about 3 years ago and commissioned a report. The report came out and they judged France needs to return a bunch of a lot of art to its original countries. The president vowed to do so, and I think so far the plan has been to return 25 objects to Benin, and it's slated to happen in about 2 years or so, or next year. And so, to me, there's a way in which you can see in this, institutions paying lip service to this conversation, and in ways that here at the level of the entire state, that sounds good, but that doesn't really involve much of anything. And I'm just curious, to what extent you've seen this in your own struggle, and what do we do about this? I mean, that's a big question, but.
I mean, I think over here, we've been organizing the Anti-Columbus Day tour, which is, on Indigenous Peoples Day, because, Columbus Day is still called Columbus Day out here in New York. And so this has been at the American Museum of Natural History. And, we didn't organize one this year, but for the 4 years we've been doing that. And, we've been asking for 3 demands. One of them is renaming the day. The second is removing the statue with, they have a really racist Teddy Roosevelt statue with, an Indigenous and a Black man, which, during this whole monuments thing that happened post George Floyd, they declared that they're going to actually remove it. It hasn't happened yet, so we'll see. Speaking to the 25 different, things, like one thing happens. And then the last was, the idea of respecting the ancestors, which is kind of from our side, the kind of impossible overall demand that they can do, right? Which is, yes, you can remove the statue, you can rename the day, but that whole institution is a hall of white supremacy, right? The way they categorize things, African peoples, Asian peoples, and like the whole, I mean, it is a settler gaze. And then apart from that, this also, that museum specifically is where the eugenics movement, kind of came about. And, all of like Margaret Reed, if anybody's like a film, she's like an anthropologist, like all of that is stored in that museum. And now when we started doing our actions, I think one of the strategies that we use is it's not just about going in and negating the space, is also about enacting the world that we want to see simultaneously. So the tours and like all of these different things, like the actions outside, you either covering the statue or all of them, I think they're about building the community, the people that we want to be part of this struggle. And that's, the kind of work as well. So that's, I think, first really important. The second thing is we also then have been talking to the people at the museum, not anymore. We had a couple of meetings, and the things that you will, I think the thing that really I struggle with personally is like, we'll be talking about once again decolonization, and they'll be like, yeah, but we just got a huge grant for climate change programming, and like as if climate change programming isn't about decolonization, so we don't know. So here I think that what I'm seeing personally is that even though we're having this conversation about returning, it's not a conversation about reparations of the harms that are done, right? It's still going back into the loop of very object oriented thinking like this is one object and we're going to return it, and as if that's going to fix everything. And so I think that we need to have a much more structural conversation about what reparations means in this context, because it's not just, because we can think about like all the Egyptian art here, for example, right, with the Brooklyn Museum as well. Are you going to return it to Sisi right now? No. So I think I think that's the important thing we have to talk about, is like, what does that mean for us as a liberation struggle, not just in the Western context, but also from the different places we come from, and then how does that get connected, and how do we exchange these ideas through that? And so I think in terms of that, the thing that I really loved about the Congolese activist was he just went in and just took it, and he's like, this is mine. And I think we need, and the ancestors, and the thing is that I think we need to see more of those acts, and I think that we're at that time where if there isn't that kind of, if you're just gonna wait, it's just, we have to, none of the freedom struggles were won by just asking for shit.
Yeah, I just want to add, because
I just want to say in passing, the artist you mentioned is called Emery Mwazulu Diabanza, and he did twice went into the Quai Branly Museum in Paris, and how would you say that?
Fabulous.
Recovered local objects. He was just sentenced to, he was just fined €1,000 for his actions. He did this in Marseille as well. So
I mean, I think the question. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think she.
Oh, I was going to just add.
Go ahead. Sorry.
The thing with what we've always asked. See, demands have multiple functions. Making demands, right? The French, you can think of like, May 68, slogans like, the idea was around impossible demands, right? Demand the impossible. What that's important for two reasons, because it understands, well, for us, it understands colonialism. See, colonialism is all about bureaucracy, process. You see it in the killing of George Floyd. You see it in the killing of Black people in the United States. Oh yeah, we'll put a commission, we'll investigate it. Okay, now the rule of law. And the rule of law is also bullshit, right? So when you think about Macron putting some commission, what they're doing is trying to find, okay, we've addressed it, right? Okay, we're not unreasonable, because they see the thing escalating, but at the same time, they remain in control. This is what it's about. Whether it's the Brooklyn Museum or the French government or any of these institutions, the issue isn't around the demands. The issue is, more importantly, they do not want to relinquish control, right? So the first element of not relinquishing control is not acknowledging demands. The second one is to acknowledge demands, but not deal with the people that are making the demands. The third one, right, is that you designate a representative for the group, right? That was colonization.
That's what.
That's how you end up with the Palestinian Authority speaking on behalf of the Palestinian people. That's why you end up with all these people speaking on behalf of others when no one can represent them. And I think that in articulating a way forward what we've said, because the thing is about creating crisis. Crisis offers opportunity, and institutions are not uniform. And we know many good people work there for jobs. So then how do you unsettle that? How do you make governing structure weaker? How do you create discord and allow for possibility and opportunity? Sometimes the organizing happens on the inside, like with the Whitney Museum. Then it's the responsibility of people on the outside to respond. Sometimes it's people on the outside that can act, that then creates space for people on the inside to push upward. And so when we're saying decolonization, we're saying reparations, we're saying restitution, we're saying land back, we are saying the museum is not neutral, and then we need a seat at the table, the stakeholders, all of these people. What we're saying is that perhaps the museum needs to be abolished altogether. We don't know, but we need to be committed to this process, and we'll see it through wherever it goes. And that's why all the work that we've done remains open. It's not about a statue, but what's important about the statue is that it communicates abstract grievances that puts a signal out in the world for people to find each other. And when people find each other, they break the alienation. They see the affirmation. And then they learn to move and walk together. And that's important.
I mean, do you think, this issues of identity politics or diversity, like, okay, there was a curator, and this is a white curator, and this is an African, exhibition or whatever, these kind of things, which immediately one does get the sort of irritation that you're supposed to with the, with what, so that does, it does incite something very problematic. But is the focus on those like solo curators and things like that, is that a distraction, or is that something one should focus one's energy on? How does one work through, what is kind of a mess of identity politics around some of these things,
I think for me, the term is always thinking about assimilation. Are we assimilating into that system, or are we actually, unsettling it and figuring out, like, structurally, does it make sense to even have that structure? So, for example, I think one of the things is like, one of the things to think about is like, okay, fine, we will have, it's not about like having the idea of curators being, more people of color curators or things like that. But do we actually need curators in the museum? Do we need that structure of the museum? Do we need a director of the museum? So it's not that, for example, with the case of Brooklyn Museum or anywhere else, like, oh, we need a progressive director of the museum. We probably don't even need a director, right? And so I think that's really the question. So I think the way, I think the way we think about it is like, it's not about assimilation into a system to make it more, diverse and in terms of its color, but it's actually looking at it from a structural perspective. Whiteness as a structure more than a skin color, right? And so it's not that, white people cannot do anti-colonial curating, but in what structure are you doing it, and what's the context, and what are you,
what's anti-colonial curating?
Yeah, what is anti-colonial curating, right?
What is
That's the term that they've been using, that we're doing anti-colonial curating.
What is this nonsense?
So I think that's, so I think it's definitely a distraction in the sense of like, oh, we know we've done damage for years and we've done harm. Yeah, we'll give you, a piece of the pie, or we'll give you the breadcrumbs, and like, shut up after that. And because we still want to hold the power, which is the core of this, right? You still want to hold the power of the museum. You still want a curator. You still want a director. You still want the art to look a specific way. And so I think that the question in this case, like, is really like, do you want a museum or do you want a sanctuary space based on where we are right now in this world? And I think then the processes are different.
And that's the role of demands. In other words, part of making demands is that the ability to engage with a structure that exists, point beyond it, but recognize that you actually can do work now here. It's the horizon that you're trying to seek. This isn't about replacing a curator with another one, right? Because it's not about reducing harm. We're not engaged in harm reduction. We're engaged in how to get free. We're engaged in processes that we want to live. We're living now. We don't want to live later. We're living now, and we're being hurt now. So when we look at a museum, it's because this is something that we have a relationship to. This is something that is in our community. And this is something that it doesn't look clear, but it's harming us. And to Natasha's point, curator comes from care. Well, who do we have caring for the Benin masks? The bronze knot. Who do we have? Who can give that kind of care? And if we're talking about care, why do we have to create a noun?
Right.
And why is that a job that gets paid by people that don't give two shits, and then you expect the outcome to be different?
Yeah, so true. It's very true. We're getting a bunch of questions, but while my internet is good, because I'm feeling now paranoid that I may lose it, I had a more of a personal question in terms of who inspired you all. Like, I've heard podcasts from you. I mean, you guys really are super articulate and incredible, and are building movements, actions. I mean, it's incredible. Where did you learn? What are your sort of starting points? Were they like tipping points? How did you end up doing this?
I think it was when we met each other. That's where we started. So we actually met at the photography school. So I came from India, and my father was in the army, and I'm Sikh, and I'm from Punjab. So there's a lot of like, the kind of I've learned about the national freedom movement, and specifically also right now everything that's happening in Punjab, right? They're literally trying to take the land away from farmers and stuff like that. So that's definitely like the core of me. Like that's my history. And then for Amin was raised in Palestine and was part of like the the uprisings there and was organizing since I think he was a kid. And so I think that like really learning a lot from Palestine specifically, and then just coming from these histories and meeting each other, and then finding about folks like the Zapatistas or like the Black radical tradition or the kind of the movements that are everywhere. And I think that meeting people and building these relations is really what inspires us.
Yeah, and it's where we learned, where we learn as well. I mean, I think, it's been a set of failures. I think that also that have taught us, right? And this is what's really important. It's like it's complicated, it's messy. It's a different way of struggling and living and undoing. And you don't have the answers, but you have to act and you have to move. And I think that when you find others who reached a similar conclusion, you find community, and you need community to be able to think this way and think differently. So that's one thing. And then I think the other thing about us is that our politics comes from a place outside of the institution of the university. I don't think universities are invested in teaching us how to get free when they put students in debt, when they take them out of a society and then put them in a job. And then, so you see what I'm saying? So it's like, when you kind of come from a background or relationships, whether it's Palestine or Punjab or people here who, are, upbringing has allowed them, you start seeing things not in the contours that are given to you, right? That's why a museum to me just looks as a site of struggle. There's nothing profound about a museum. There's nothing profound about a university. What's profound about it is the commodification of knowledge. And then telling people there's only one type, and it's Western, and it's predominantly in English translated to other languages, when they have produced the kind of catastrophe of Western civilization that we're seeing today, whether it's climate or earth or whatever. For us, this is like, when you come from a space that isn't indoctrinated that way, then you're able to see connections. And I think that the thing between me and Natasha is like, I was doing work around Palestine, you were doing work around India, or, and we realized that being nation-centric, nation-state-centric right now is a problem.
Right? I mean, it's the worst. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No. You had he was just getting to it, and the only follow-up I would have is you had articulated, Natasha, very beautifully in a podcast you recently did, that there were like 6 pillars or something of how you all, do you remember them, or 7? I don't know.
Yes.
I know that Palestine, do you want to just to kind of teach us, like, which are these?
Yeah, I mean, I think
that invigorate.
The 6 of them is, indigenous sovereignty, Black liberation, free Palestine, global wage workers, degentrification, and dismantling patriarchy. And now this is a joke, I'm going to declare it, but we're thinking of like, a 7th one, which is like interplanetary solidarity against empire everywhere. Because of just the shit that's happening with Mars. Which is, I don't
Mars
even know.
We're trying to get ahead.
We're trying to get ahead of our organizing. But, we're going to come up with a
we're joking,
iteration.
but
But I think so I think that's also based on that, I was just Palestine for me personally has been a huge center point for learning, because my context is the British Empire. I've lived that history, and so you see that in India. I mean, if you're raised there between farmers and army, like you see it, like my grandfather fought like the World War for British Indian Army, and so like things like that. So it's like so it's that history. But then once you go to Palestine and you see the same shit, like literally, collective punishment, to the way the borders are drawn, to any any sorts of like defeating on the organizing Palestine, that's when it strikes you. And I think, like, also now with what's happening in Kashmir, it was much easier for me to understand how that is settler colonization once I had the experience of organizing with Palestine. And I think that's the kind of shared vocabulary that we need to build so that we can understand what happened to us and where we can go from there. And I think that work has been also very important.
Yeah, thank you. Greg, should we take some questions? Connor has been asking some fabulous questions. I'm going to pull them up. Connor Thomas Reed. He's a fan. How can U.S. liberation movements develop a shared timing of rebellion? Ooh, that's tough. Coordinating uprisings across U.S. cities, or with Nigeria, anti-SARS actions, Argentina, indigenous land struggles?
I mean, I think the shared timing, is important. I think it happens naturally. Like, I think there's things that we can control and there's things that we can't. I think the thing that we control is we organize, we do the work, we learn how to be organized in smaller groups, we learn how to move and how to help other people move. We engage with the imagination, with culture, because at the end of the day, people need to rise up, and they rise up not organized in any kind of hierarchical way. And trying to do it otherwise, I mean, you can look at the Russian Revolution, or you can look at other contexts. You can look at the Palestinian context, the first uprising, the second uprising. None of them were organized. There were incidents that were sparked by something. But here we have in the United States the George Floyd moment. Was it sustainable in that way? No. Well, what do we learn from that? We haven't built as much in the right way, connected generationally, right? But these are the failures that are part of growing and building. In other words, they're not negative. There's a bunch of people coming in, but one of the things around the ability for us to resist is for us to be able to live. The uprisings will come. The question for us is, like, how do we organize 100 years, 200 years, 300 years out? Because we're talking about thousands of years of ideology and oppression. So an uprising, a shaking off, if it's not successful or sustainable, results in power coming back at you stronger. You saw it in May 68. You got Thatcher, you got Reagan, so forth. Now you have these uprisings, We need to find ways in which the sparks that happen are communicating with each other. Maybe they shouldn't happen at the same time. We don't know. But the only thing that we are focused on right now is to continuously be in touch with people and supporting the work that's happening, and also preparing for that moment of uprising.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I would add, especially, going from the George Floyd moment, I think, and then also just, from our own experience from like starting from Occupy to all the, the Ferguson moment, has been that a lot of the organizing in the United States is very nation state kind of based. It's all about the United States, and it's very closed inside conversation. Even the abolition conversation that is happening is very much about police reform, or like within the United States as a structure. And I think that if we're going to talk about abolition, we have to talk about abolition of borders, abolition of prisons, abolition of universities, landlords, everything should be museums, like the whole spectrum. And I think that that's the thing that's been missing. And I think, I don't know if like the US, I don't know how to coordinate it, but I do think that it also starts from us as organizers and learning what we have learned around like what movement means, like especially with the US as an empire. If you really look at it as an empire, not just as a racist state, right? But it is an empire, and it is a settler colonial empire. If we include all of those things, I think we can think about it, but there's a lot of work that we still need to do to kind of break out of it. And I think the reason is because there's a lot of trauma and hurt, right? So it's not like, it's not about oppression Olympics, so to say, but there is a lot of trauma and hurt, and we do need to put a lot of care into it. And I think a lot of people are exhausted. It's been a long battle, but I think like, being hopeful that we can build these relations, I think that's really important right now, especially with our anti-imperialism.
Yeah, I mean, I don't.
Connor's point, which is the thing that we've done well here is that when we've done something, we've used empire to transmit outwardly. So many people know about the Brooklyn Museum, about the American Museum of Natural History, about the Whitney Museum, about some of the actions against the police before the George Floyd moment. So I think, like, you know, in a way, we can offer signals and sparks and put things in circulation from here.
Yeah. So I think, you know, so some of what I was going to ask you about the current, I don't know, we're calling it the uprising for Black lives, I guess, you know, and that's become a kind of a global, something has changed in various places. And I think, you know, you pointed out some of the, not the problems, but some of the things that still need to be done as this moment is shaping up. But can I ask, like, what do you think they're getting right? Or like, what is something interesting or different? Is there a shift? Like, what is there a way you can define this moment, but with a kind of eye towards what's good or what's interesting or what's different?
I don't think you can understand the Black Lives Matter movement and movement for Black lives without kind of going back to 2010, 2011.
Right.
In a way, this has been a call and response from Tunisia and Egypt onward. Now, a lot of POC and Black folks were involved in the organizing with Occupy that later got represented as white and later, you know, produced a lot of white people coming out, and it produced the Bernie Sanders, you know, movement or grouping. But what that moment was about is, you know, a moment of rupture. We say that, again, got class right, but didn't get its context right. So it didn't look.
It went against capitalism, but didn't.
But it was still within nation states, so it didn't go. It wasn't anti-imperialist in any strong way. It definitely had issues around patriarchy. Most importantly, though, it didn't recognize that it was on stolen land in a structural way, nor did it recognize racial justice as core to collective liberation. Right? That was the failure. It had many successes, right? You had over 1,100 encampments across the United States. Now, you had the Black Lives Matter movement in 2014, and they forged bonds with the Palestinian Liberation Movement. So that was already kind of a breaking out of the you know, an anti-imperial stance, an introduction of reparations. Right? And also just kind of thinking about the police as we don't need them. How do we take care of ourselves? So, but what it didn't do, and I think it kind of may have gone into too much identity politics, which is not fair to the Combahee Collective and where that phrasing comes from. Sure. It's what it's been watered down as. But really, people, when they use that terminology, they're just talking about a politics of identity. Right. Which is very different than an analysis around identity politics. A politics that is like, do we look the same? Do we come from the same place? Right? All right, so a Black person is going to take care of me because I'm a Black person, or a Palestinian is going to take care of me because I'm a Palestinian. And what you always know is the reason people remain oppressed is because there's always rats on the ship. Because always the people that sell you look like you. Right? And if you come from a colonial context, you know it.
Yeah.
Right? So
as you were mentioning Kenya.
You know what I mean? But that's just the reality. That's why we need an analysis. So you had class, you didn't have, you know, but you didn't have race and you didn't have indigenous, other contexts.
I mean, the standing, it's also like, you know, it's Occupy, Ferguson moment, Standing Rock, and then we are here at, you know.
All these come together in moments of rupture for us, a movement yet to come that is mature. And maybe it's not even called a movement. Maybe it's an infinite uprising. And maybe the uprising is because people all of a sudden they have soil on their rooftops, and we've taken over the museums, and we've taken over Central Park, and we've housed people there. But what does it mean to call a space autonomous of the police if we can't even take care of each other? Because this is what they do when we had encampments. What did they do? The police took people out of jails, and they had drug addictions. They may have been rapists, whatever, and they put them in the park. So you're seeking liberation, trying to enact another world. What are you supposed to do with them? How are you supposed to deal with each other? You don't dispose, otherwise you fall into the same background. We haven't done that work yet.
Right. Right.
The degree we need.
Oh my gosh.
This I mean, we
So,
sort of backtracking here, but in connection with Connor's second question, I guess I don't know if we can show that one, but it makes me
Hello, Connor.
where you know, he's asking something very specific here, right? How do you develop artistic materials to be used as direct agitation propaganda? But I had a broader related question. So, you know, we've talked a lot about artistic institutions and the way they place a creation. Where do you see artistic creation, you know, sort of featuring in all of this? Yeah, I guess I'll just leave the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
wait, you know, and this tied into some.
What? Oh, we lost her.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You lost me
No,
again?
you're there. Go ahead.
Am I here? I hear you when you're talking about me. I'm kidding. But no, because there was also a point when they said the MTL Collective describes itself as a collaboration of research, aesthetics, organizing, and action. And I understand 3 of them, but I always want to know more about the aesthetics aspect. You know, what the fit is, you know?
Yeah. I think just to get us started on aesthetics, I think that you know, this is coming once again from a lot of you know, decolonial people have talked about it better than I can. But you know, for example, Nelson Molondano Torres, he talks about this as well. I mean, decolonial aesthetics, you know, aesthetics is about the way we sense the world, the time and space that we navigate. And you know, I think that for us, the aesthetics, the shift has been in understanding how to break this linear model of time and space and the colonial condition, and how do we then create these pockets of time that are outside of that, right? So the reason we call them pockets of time is because, like, for example, when you enter, like, doing an action in the museum, you break the linearity of time that's there in relation to the institution, and you bring your own time and space to it. And by that, I mean the histories, the future, the present, everything all together, the relationships. And so I think the aesthetics is not necessarily in the context of form, like a banner or a poster or things like that, because I think that's very much like driven by, you know, the way people look at art as exhibitions or in a specific, you know, context of galleries. But aesthetics means like a practice, you know, the training and practice of freedom, basically. Like aesthetics being like, how do we actually train ourselves to be free when we've been living under colonization and, you know, in all of these different ways. And we're the oppressors too. And it's not just that we're the oppressed, we're also the oppressors in this different context, be it, you know, like, for example, my father being in the army or a class context or all of these things. So I think aesthetics then means like, how do we actually train to be free, and how do we actually work through that in action and the act of doing. And so aesthetics then becomes more about like, you know, holding space for each other, having these relationships and breaking that linearity of time.
And just to kind of, this ties directly, so I'm going to answer the same question from the specificity of Connor's question. Look, we make banners, we make zines, we create knowledge. It's collaborative. So much invisible labor that isn't recognized as a capitalist commodity, because we're measuring time and relationships, even value different, right? And we're coming together, and there's something beautiful and something generous and something, right? These are the things that are enacted in this kind of work. So everything that we've done right now has been coming from what we call the ground up. It has come with an accountability or responsibility to the people and the struggles that we're engaged in. It has come that the form it takes, what we choose to work on, how do we choose to spend our time. It all happens on that level. And to Connor's point, he's part of it. That's what we're making. And we choose to make a zine, not because someone commissioned us to make it, or because we're good at zines. We make zines because that's how we can get, that just makes sense of what movement generated art is telling us should include, right? So we're coming up with our own stuff. But the zines that we made result in action, result in recognition, result in knowledge. And then you have museums, what do they want to do? Or the Ford Foundation, what do they want to do? Give you money so they can exhibit you. So it's always this constant kind of bringing in, right? But what I tell my students who are studying aesthetics and who are doing their MFA, first, they shouldn't be doing it at all. But to the extent that they are for their own context, you're just like, even if you didn't give a two shits about anything, the hottest commodity art you can make is shit that looks political right now.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah, that's the trap.
It's like-
I had a, sorry, Greg, go ahead, Greg.
it's just I was just thinking it's I mean, isn't that the history of modernist art though, right? I mean, in the podcast, I knew somebody was asking you about your intervention during the Futurist exhibition a few years back, and you know, we in my class when I teach the Futurist Manifesto, I was just saying, well, look at this thing, right? It's the birth of fascism, and all it is just empty words that sound like you're doing something, right? It's like war, revolution. He's not talking about anything.
Speed.
So, right, yeah, speed, whatever. So I mean, it's you know, these are not really, you know. Again, I mean, I like what you said about time, right? I mean, there's a way in which museums are also just predicated on stopping things, right? I mean, it's all about. And it's more a comment than a question. But a few years back, I remember seeing this exhibition. I think originally was supposed to be a piece by Andy Warhol, but the original idea was a table with objects that you would pick one up and then drop one, right? But it was maybe at Beaubourg or somewhere in Paris, and it was just covered in plexiglass, right? So they kept it from God knows when, 1969, and now you could only look at it, which the best, you know,
Imagine.
there was a time when
Wow.
moving, but now you can just look this sort of anyway. That was talk about
Yeah. That's funny. Well, I had a more maybe, you know, I was recently a guest for some class, and the students were asking me very fundamental questions, and I was starting to kind of feel really kind of ill at ease, because they were like, well, how can we make change? And, you know, what can we do when we have our jobs to not be part of the system and so on? And I was like, I don't know. But then, you know, you both kept saying, like, we are also gentrifiers, we are also oppressors, we are also, and so on. So I don't know, like, you know, as soon as I start thinking that, then I'm totally stuck, you know. As soon as and I know many people feel that way, you know. I am, you know, a consumer. I am participating in a massively hyper-capitalist system, like, and then you feel constantly hypocritical. Part of the answer is, like, you know, never have any ego and just keep going or something, but that's very hard. I don't know. What are you advocating?
I think personally,
I'm going to be that person.
I think the way I think about it is that it's not about purity, right? And I think the idea of purity is we need to contest that. And the way I learned it is, you know, like I think it was 2 years ago. I was home during my vacation time. I was in my village in Punjab, and every time I go back home, my father is not talking to a different person, but it's like the 10 people in a circle together. So I have to ask him today, who are we talking to? Who can we go have chai with, and who are we not, right? But it's a community that's fighting with each other. And then, like, this time we can talk to that person, and the next time we can't talk to that person, right? And I think that's like understanding that it's like, and because it also goes to cancel culture, right? This idea of like being a gentrifier, being like, all these, this is all contested on cancel culture, as if we have some form of purity around what liberation looks like. It's going to be messy as hell. That's all I know. It's been messy. We have so much trauma. We have so many desires. We have so much shit to deal with. There's no freaking way we can be purist about it. The only thing we could do is, act, learn better questions, be humble, and keep moving. And, Amin says this, movements need to keep moving. And I think that's really important. I mean, that's the way I think about it.
Bhakti, a response would be to kind of think about, my experience has been, you're in a circle, and it's usually with white folks, but it doesn't have to be. It can be based on class privilege. We all have a set of privileges beyond just skin color, right? And that's why it's important to read Gayatri Spivak and Kendall Subaltern speak, because there's so much revisiting it all the time, because it isn't about, here's my identity on a ladder of identities of oppression, and if I'm trans and I'm this and I'm that and all these things, then I have the perfect package of like being oppressed, and therefore I have this perverse privilege in thinking about it. The question, the thing that I experience is like, especially with white people, they're just like, well, you know, I'm white, so I just want to acknowledge that privilege. It's not about acknowledging a set of privileges. That's not the project. That's not the project I'm interested in. I'm not saying I'm a gentrifier so I can continue to gentrify. I'm not saying I'm a I'm trying to understand my positionality. Maybe I shouldn't use a noun at all. Maybe I'm here and I have certain debts and I'm complicit in a certain set of oppressions that are ongoing. I need to take action against that. So who am I going to ally myself with for the purposes of collective liberation, for the purposes of actually feeling good? Because so much about what we feel in alienation is the refusal to recognize the realities that we're living. And all we're trying to say is like, when I say I'm a gentrifier, it's not so that that's the beginning of trying to ask better questions. That's all it is. I'm Palestinian. I'm not from here. I'm a guest. Am I a settler? What kind of responsibilities and agency does this produce for me? And in the set of recognizing privileges, then how can we use these privileges strategically towards collective liberation? But if you are a white person who's fighting for Black lives, you know what I mean? Because you feel bad, that's neither here nor there. You need to understand how that system is killing you too, which is a paraphrasing of something Fred Moten says all the time in the Undercommon. We need to know, we have a responsibility to ask ourselves day and night, how is the system that we're a part of, not how we're doing better than others, but how are we dying too in the process? That's the line that we're trying to draw with these things. And once people recognize, and different people and other recognize how they are being harmed directly, even though less clearly or less visibly, then we get someone. We have the possibility to get someone together. So it's hard. Recognizing a certain thing is hard. But at the same time, what we see people doing is they teach about freedom and they uphold a carceral state. Now, I teach. The first thing I spend time with my students saying is, why are we here?
Right.
It's a question we have to ask. Because I know my students are here because people told them it's a good idea. People told them if you go for 4 years and you get a degree, you'll come out and you'll get a job. What they didn't tell them, and so they study freedom or they study whatever. What they didn't realize is now all of a sudden they have $100,000 worth of debt in which I got a salary from. And you tell them, and they want to talk about freedom. But what is freedom other than time? Right? And we're not learning this in schools. We're having these conversations with each other. So it's like, I'm saying this not so I can feel like I'm not going to do anything. I'm saying this because as any artist, the first principle is like, you got to act from a place of truth. If you're lying to yourself because you have a job at the UN trying to create peace between Palestine and Israel, just stop. Just say it's a job. Don't say you're trying to produce justice in the world.
Yeah, mic drop. But also, like, I like the aesthetics of disembodiment, you know, where you just see his hand doing this work. Just teasing. But well, I have 1,000 million questions. But Greg, is it time for music, or do you have one last burning question, Greg? What do you think?
Well, I didn't really have a question. I have a good transition.
We do. We have them trapped in this Zoom rectangle. All right. No, it's okay. We should go into, so Greg decolonizes music taste for us. I don't know if he's succeeding today, but we'll see.
We'll start with okay. So that's you.
Oh, it's a beautiful photo.
Okay, let's start with this one.
See? What is this?
The Carters at the Louvre Museum. How about that? This probably will get cut at editing later. So, hello, Beyonce. An interesting. I mean, I
This is-
show
this
the
is-
video, but of course, the entire video takes place at the Louvre Museum, which I assume they rented for a lot of money. I mean, I don't know if we restart the conversation here, but I mean, I thought, you know, an interesting take on the conversations we were having, right? I mean, this obviously generated a lot of conversations, but talk about, you know, crossing sort of responsibilities and also oppressions, right? I mean, I feel like this is sort of a textbook for what you were just talking about. You know, there's a commentary on representation, but then not necessarily on class, let's say. So
That's always her issue.
all right, let's keep going here. Let's see. So now, one of the godfathers of French hip hop, here with the song Les Colonies. It's not recent, but it's great and on point. So let's just play that.
On a connu les colonies, l'anthropophage, l'économie, la félonie, la traite d'esclaves, la dette, le FMI, Bruno Jean-Marie. Si je cours, j'ai des raisons, les mêmes que les deux nègres sous un avion. Avant, c'était déjà grave.
I was told that Bakhti actually knows all the words to this song.
The whole album. I know the whole album by heart.
Ah,
I don't know why. It's one of those at some particular point in my life I was listening to a lot.
Yeah, it's
But
good.
yeah.
The album. Also, again, interesting. 19 years later, right? I mean, a lot of what he's talking about, including the politicians he's naming, are still around. That conversation slowly advancing in France, but again, in context, rather interesting. We were talking about Nigeria, I believe.
Oh.
This is back to you. Want to talk about Nneka?
I don't know very much about her. It's just that she represents, like, you know, I think the NSARS, and, you know, we've heard a lot about Fela Kuti, Sean Kuti, and all that. And I just thought, you know, she has a great. I love this song. You know, she's a political thinker. She's still kind of slick in her aesthetics and stuff like that. But I still like this song.
Yeah, and I think, again, I mean, sort of connect to your earlier conversations. A lot of, you know, MC Soda and Nneka, other artists we'll talk about today and I've talked about today, also have very international roots, right? I mean, there's no, you know, we can talk about their career, but also the sort of, you know, how far that their message goes, or even, you know, just themselves. I mean, it's all very international in ways that, you know, are commercial at some level, but also, I think, in the message, which is an interesting way to connect to what you were talking about earlier.
Niger, in the loud and rowdy of my world, there's a secret place where I find myself. Can I find you, Biafra? The noise of horns of thirsty Nigerians, of hustlers, of mothers confront me as I walk past Lagos in prayer contemplation.
Right, I hear she's also an actress. Have you seen any of her movies?
No, I've seen her live played New York City, and there was a song at the time that was a big hit of hers called Heartbeat or something like that. And she asked the audience, like, oh, what do you want to hear? And then I don't know what people said, but just my voice popped up and I said the name of the song, and then she like reprimanded me. That's the same one. Everybody wants me to hear that same song, you know, what the hell? And I was like, help. So, you know, I bet she's good on screen. But yeah.
You have trauma then. All right, moving on. So this is also not so recent, but also timely, right? With the, you know, at least in homage to the Anglophone crisis in Cameroon, you know, the violence going on there and the separatist movement in the south. This is one of those super groups put together by Manu Dibango, who died of COVID recently. So this is from 2003, and that's I'll dedicate it especially to Rose from Cameroon, Rose Ndange, who told me about this. Here's the song.
Eda pongo madesan mututa wana ine pas nepa wana ine pas aye ndolo nyese yes didi longona mo wabatete ndenye bo wabale mo wae mo wabatete ndenye bo wabale.
Song about the ancestors.
Gorgeous, beautiful.
Moving on here, someone in music very close to our discussion. Picho Wamba Conga is a Congolese Belgian artist, performance artist, and musician. So he's been doing a lot in Belgium. Started in the 90s in what was the name of his rap group? Onde de Choc, and then went solo. He's also a theater actor and performance artist. But you know, a direct connection with our conversation. He was part of. And was one of the starters of a festival that I don't know if it's happening this year, but it's been happening every other year in Belgium since 2014, called Congolisation, or Congolization, movement to decolonize Belgium, right? So it involves a lot of artists of Congolese origin, not strictly, but mostly, and you know, they're engaged with decolonizing the Belgian spaces in Brussels, among other things. I know they were involved somehow with they renovated the Africa Museum in Brussels. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with that space.
No.
It was, I saw it before it changed. It was a colonial museum. It was very much what it was. I don't know what they turned it into, but I hear it's changed a lot. I'll trust people, I guess. But meanwhile, here is Picho with Le Jour Où.
Le jour où la guerre s'arrêtera, j'espère que ce sera sur un cliché de quartier Bresson, accompagné d'un son de Michael Jackson. Allons, dansons. Profitons du temps qui nous reste, lâchons du lest, direction Los Angeles avant de se laisser guider pour la cité des dieux. Tellement désireux de plus se quitter des yeux. Un moment délicieux, marqué par le temps d'un absolu présent, un éternel.
There's a funny non-rhyme here that I'll spare you, but there's all sorts of old rhymes in French, and then it's Michael Jackson, which is those who speak will get it. It's very funny. And we are here to our last contribution.
Oh my gosh.
One of the people
That's a season finale for us, Greg.
Ghanaian Romanian musician has been making music since 2007. This song in particular is from album Fruitopian Raps from 2017. It's called Colony Cleanse. And maybe the title speaks for itself. Otherwise, I guess we can listen.
See the mind make constipated, plus the shit stay miseducated. So the time big right now for colonial cleanse. Colony cleanser, bring the ginger. Put it in the blend to a squat like ninja. Add one history plus literature. Dissolve the borders, then be cancer. Puppet masters, them all be dancers. I know that the answer.
Maybe that's the final message, right? Maybe it's. We all know
he's really whimsical. He did crazy things, like just not wear shoes for 2 years and things like that. I have a friend who is a huge fan anyway, but
it's really good. I did not know him. I'm glad you introduced me to him.
Thank you. All right. So I think this is goodbye. Wait, Amin is getting us something.
No. That's Marge.
Doing a little.
What are you reading, Marge?
Of subjection.
So Saidia Hartman, and if I can show off, I was in Palestine for 1 week, and she was there.
Oh wow!
With us.
That's great.
Well, it was the Palestine Lit Fest. There were a lot of celebrities.
Oh yeah.
But she was she was amazing. She was wonderful.
There was supposed to be a Lit Fest here, and then
COVID.
COVID happened. So now it's being delayed, and it's probably going to be early next year, but it's going to be on Zoom.
The Palestine?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it's being organized by one of the organizers is with MTL Plus.
Who is that?
Andrew Ross.
Andrew Ross.
He just wrote the book. What is it? Stoneman? No.
Yeah. Stoneman.
Who built the state of Israel?
Who built the state of Israel?
Ah,
It's actually really good. It's about Palestinian migrant workers on their own land, basically, like building the
Oh
state.
my gosh!
Israel.
Of course.
But it's
Wow.
published by Verso.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay, we'll check it out. Well, thank you so much, Amin and Natasha. That was amazing.
This was so
Amazing,
beautiful. And I'm
absolutely.
going to go check out all these other, music things that you've done for the rest of the.
And for the record, we miss Jasbir
Yeah.
because we would love to hear her.
Yeah.
Yeah, this would have been an amazing come. Yeah, we
Look, here she is. Good to see all of you, she said. Yeah, we missed her, all my thinking around it had been with her in mind, but she'll have to come back. You'll have to come back. Anyway, and I just want to say huge thanks to all the people who have watched the 5 episodes. We've had lots and lots of viewers, questions, ideas, thoughts, and it's been really invigorating and exciting, and we've learned so much, right, Greg?
Yes, we have.
Yeah, and then we hope to be back given energies and given time, and watch out for the series. Greg's Decolonize Hipsters might be one of the first ones published. So we shall see. And then followed quickly by Decolonize Environmentalism, Decolonize Self-Care, and so on. So it's exciting. And then 2021 is going to be exciting. And all right, thanks again. And then Varia, thank you so much for your support all this time. And we will roll the end credits and say goodbye.
Thank you so much for
Thank you
having
so
us.
much.
This was amazing. Yeah.
Bye.
You're welcome.
Everyone for November, it's coming.
That's just the beginning of shit show.
Where is Varia? She has